In 1979, Sean Cunningham called Victor Miller and said, "Hey, Halloween's making a lot of money. Let's rip it off." What would result is 45 years of terror, killings, slashings, and one of the most profitable horror franchises of all time. Today, we dig deep and we dive into the Friday the 13th series. Let's talk about it. Hello everyone, Vic here with another video. Today we're talking Friday the 13th from 1980. As we said, Sean Cunningham had the brilliant idea to rip off Halloween, and why not? It made a Goku amount of money as an independent feature. So here comes Sean Cunningham, who had been making independent films, not too successful per se, but he did have Last House on the Left with Wes Craven back in the 70s, but had been looking for the next big thing since then, and Friday the 13th would prove to be the big thing he was looking for. Thanks in part to Victor Miller, who would write the script. Of course, now we know both names because there's been the famous lawsuit of the last 5, 10, 15 years. That's kind of held the franchise in limbo, not allowing us to get sequels, at least on screen. We are getting a prequel television series coming soon. So Victor Miller and Sean Cunningham, once upon a time, though, were actually on good terms, made this movie together, and we should all be thankful because we all love Jason. But let's talk about the original movie, because a lot of times with horror franchises, we have a thing where the original is automatically placed on a pedestal. We assume the original has to be better than the sequels. We assume that the original has to be some higher quality film than the sequels. It's kind of built into the psyche of how we see horror franchises. We have Halloween being always considered much better than the sequels in the Halloween franchise. We have Nightmare on Elm Street, for the most part, being considered the best in the series by most people, I'd say. Obviously, Dream Warriors is also very popular. Hellraiser, Child's Play. With most horror franchises, Scream, I feel like the original usually is put on a pedestal because it's probably the first one you saw. It usually has the most creative energy behind it because it's the OG. It was made for more artistic reasons in a lot of cases. So the original, rightfully so, usually is held on a pedestal. And Friday the 13th is one franchise where I would say not only is the original not one of the best, I would say it's not in my top 4 in the entire series. Now, how do I come to that conclusion? Well, recently I rewatched the original Friday the 13th, so I'm going to give some thoughts on the movie today. The movie was made with a budget of $600,000, which, hey, Halloween was $300,000, so this was definitely twice the budget of Halloween, believe it or not. Even though Halloween looks like a much better, well-lit, better produced film, some of that's because Halloween had the benefit of the cinematography from Dean Cundey. Friday the 13th didn't have Dean Cundey, so it does look pretty low budget, even at $600,000. This looks like a very small scale movie. And it was. This movie was shot in New Jersey, takes place in New Jersey. That's right. Camp Crystal Lake originally is New Jersey. And the sequels, it gets a little bit iffy, but we'll get to that much later in different videos. In New Jersey, shot in an actual camp, using actors who at the time were just scale actors looking for opportunities. A lot of actors get their start in horror movies. A lot of famous actors start off in horror movies. And that's the case here because we have Kevin Bacon. 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. He had done Animal House, thought he'd become a star, was not a star, was waiting tables in New York, got the opportunity to do Friday the 13th, and here he is. He's going to have one of the most classic, iconic kills in the franchise. Kevin Bacon, one of the best actors in horror movies. Shout out also to Tremors, my favorite Kevin Bacon movie, along with Hollow Man. Okay, so anyways, $600,000 shooting at camp. Sean Cunningham working with Victor Miller on the script, but even with low budgets, sometimes you have a star in the making, and sometimes that star can elevate the entire picture. And maybe with Halloween, that star was both John Carpenter and Dean Cundey. But here the star is Tom Savini, famous, iconic horror makeups person. You've heard of him doing Dawn of the Dead, Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th Part 4, The Prowler. Tom Savini, man, The Burning. Amazing horror makeups guy. If you're making a slasher film in the 80s and you have the benefit of Tom Savini, you're immediately going to have an elevated, good chance at least impressing horror fans, making the right impression. Because as horror fans, not to say we need like a lot of gore in order to make a slasher film entertaining, but you need a decent amount of gore in most cases. Otherwise, you really have to rely on suspense and a lot of other trickery to make the movie entertaining. Like the original Halloween didn't have gore, but there's such a good suspense, music, build-up, tension. That movie relies on those factors so it can get away without the gore. The Friday the 13th movies can't get away with that per se. You need some gore here. So Tom Savini is the man for the job. let's talk about the movie itself for a moment. Okay, Friday 13th begins with two random camp counselors being killed in, I believe, 1957. It's our first introduction to what would be our killer. You have the point of view killer shot of these camp counselors sort of knowing, I think, who the person is that's about to kill them. Some sort of recognition there. Having sex, which again probably leads in the idea of, sex equals death, especially in 80s horror movies. Although Sean Cunningham says that his movie was not meant to push that message, and Carpenter said, of course, it wasn't really a factor in Halloween either. But somewhere along the way, that became a horror cliche in the 80s, and it's definitely here in spades. These two camp counselors, 1957, should be off, learn how to start fires, or learn how to make s'mores, but instead, doing the bad deed and getting killed by random point of view shot. Off-screen kills, though, so it wasn't impressed by the actual kills themselves. Tom Savini would actually say that, there was an idea of making these kills graphic at the beginning, but then there's something about luring the audience in the idea of like, oh, these off-screen kills mean we're safe, and now we'll turn up the gore and the actual showing the stuff as the movie goes along. That was kind of the strategy here, which I understand completely. We're cutting to Annie. Now, Annie is our first character we're introduced to, and played by Robbie Morgan. And she is walking down a street into a town, of course, in New Jersey. She is on her way to Camp Crystal Lake. She's gotten a summer job there where she'll be cooking for apparently hundreds of kids, or at least 50 kids, I guess she says. She stumbles into a diner to ask for a ride to Camp Crystal Lake, and everybody in the diner looks at her like she has 7 heads. Now, look, I like this a lot. This is introducing the idea that there's something off with Camp Crystal Lake. Just the mention of Camp Crystal Lake sends all their heads into a tailspin. The local town folks do not think much of Crystal Lake. In fact, one of them, named Crazy Ralph, says there's a death curse. Now, look, I don't know about you guys, but I understand that, summer jobs, making money, getting experience, cooking, these are all fun things to do. But if I'm clearly told that the town I'm going to, the lake I'm going to, has a death curse, there's been mysterious deaths in the past, if I'm told that information before I get there, I'm canceling all plans for the summer job. I'm turning around. I'm going back home. I'm joining a local Little League softball team, doing something else with my summer, playing video games, learning how to ride a bike. I am not doing this stupid thing of going to a lake and getting killed by whoever. But that's me with my horror movie knowledge now. We have to give the benefit of the doubt that back in the 80s, these people hadn't seen horror movies. They didn't grow up with Friday the 13th or Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, so they're a little less horror savvy. So I give Annie a little bit of a pass here. But she gets a couple different warnings here. One is that Crazy Ralph tells her, you're doomed! Yeah, there's a death curse. She gets that. But then the truck driver who gives her the ride to Crystal Lake, or at least halfway there, he actually seems like a reasonable person. Even he tells her, quit. Quit immediately. Did Steve Christie tell you about the murders there, the child drowning? And Annie's such a nice, sort of unsuspecting, sort of probably coddled existence, not really thinking anything bad can actually happen to her, just goes with the flow and says, hey, this is a job, I got to do it. And you see her carefree ways by the fact that she is hitchhiking with multiple people to get to Camp Crystal Lake. I know that hitchhiking also was pretty prominent in the 80s, but you got to be careful about who you get in a car with. In this case, she gets into a Jeep with none other than our killer, Mrs. Voorhees. Now, there's so many questions here. One thing is that when Annie is hitchhiking, was Mrs. Voorhees, what was she doing? She's riding in the Jeep. Where's she going? She's going to Crystal Lake. She's going to her thing, basically. Did she actually care about killing Annie? Was it she immediately suspected Annie was one of the camp counselors? If Annie hadn't gotten in the car and probably told her she was going to Crystal Lake, would Mrs. Voorhees let her go if, for example, Annie was like, hey, I want to go to Higgins Haven, or I want to go somewhere else in the vicinity of Crystal Lake, but not Crystal Lake itself? Or was Annie always doomed? Well, Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller, of course, they wanted the thing here, the psycho thing, the Janet Leigh thing, the introduction to our main character who's not actually our main character. Popularized once again, eventually with Drew Barrymore with Scream in the 90s. You introduce what you think is our main character, but then for the shock value, we're going to kill them very quickly. And I do think they did a disservice to this movie in this case. Annie should have been the main character of this movie. I know that that's going to sound like sacrilegious to all the Alice fans who swear up and down that Alice is one of the best final girls in all of horror movies. I just disagree. I don't attach to Alice in any significant way at all. I think the actors did a great job, but I don't think Alice's character is well developed. I don't build an emotional connection to her. I don't think she's on the level of a Sidney Prescott or Nancy from Nightmare or Laurie Strode or even Rachel Carruthers. I think that, yes, I think Alice from Friday the 13th Part 1 is a level below Rachel Carruthers. She's better than Tina from Halloween 5, but she's a level below Rachel Carruthers. And that's maybe my controversial take here. I think that Annie, being our central character we're introduced to, have her get to Camp Crystal Lake just with her opening scenes with her. If she gets to Crystal Lake successfully, she makes it there. We're already emotionally attached to her character. That's the bottom line. We then have a point of view character throughout the movie we're actually attached to. Do your whole Miss Voorhees spoiler ending thing at the end, but have that be Annie, who probably, from what I can see, at least 6 minutes of screen time, is probably going to be one of the most likable heroines in the horror genre if you give her a chance to breathe, literally, let her live, let her character expand into the rest of the movie. Missed opportunity. I think this movie is way better if Annie's the main girl. Again, no disrespect to the actress who played Alice. I didn't gravitate to the character of Alice in the same way that other horror fans seem to do. That said, okay, they didn't go that route. They went the route of Alice or Annie jumping out the car at top speed. I don't know if that was the wisest choice either. Just go wherever she's taking you, and then, I don't know, jumping out the car at top speed, wait till she slows down something, but you immediately break your leg, break your ankle, and hitting the ground impact. The Jeep backs up. Our mysterious killer, this is going to be a whodunit movie, comes out the Jeep, eventually corners Annie in the woods, slits her throat on screen. Feel bad for Annie. I always feel bad for her. I think she's one of the most sympathetic characters in the franchise. At the same time, as I said, she had multiple warnings. That shit hair in Crystal Lake wasn't on the up and up. She probably should have turned around and went back home. But not having the horror knowledge that we do, it's forgivable. At the Camp Crystal Lake, we actually meet our actual characters that are going to be living throughout the movie. We have Brenda, we have Marcy, we have Kevin Bacon's character, we have Ned. Ned being the sort of practical joker who, in this one, will get his comeuppance. You have Steve Christie, the man who is determined to open Crystal Lake against all odds, against a damn death curse, just wants to have this lake opened. And of course, we have Alice. The characters in the movie, are the characters memorable? No, not really. I don't think that these characters are better than Part 2's characters. I don't think they're better than Part 3's characters, Part 4's characters. I do think they're probably better than Part 5's characters, but that's a different story, a whole new beginning, actually. The characters here are okay. They're somewhat likable. We do have some awkward scenes here that seem to be just filler, like them in the water seems like doesn't really have much of a purpose. Them killing the snake, sort of uncomfortable because they actually really do kill a real snake, and apparently from the behind the scenes, the actual owner of the snake was off camera sitting there crying basically because didn't really know that the snake that they brought to the set was going to be killed that day. But so kind of a weird scene with the killing of the snake. I guess it's supposed to be us bonding with the characters, but just ends up being a kind of weird, cruel, silly scene. The movie does have filler scenes throughout, I would say. For example, Steve Christie at the diner talking to the waitress, the cashier. Really no point to that scene at all. Steve Christie's character seems like he's going to be important, but gets killed in really rather uneventful fashion. So you have a lot of filler scenes here. I will say this, though. When they do the death scenes, I do like most of the death scenes in terms of the build-up, the suspense. Kevin Bacon's death scene, which would go on to be used, I feel like, in horror movies throughout the entire 80s. Always the thing of like, character getting impaled in the throat or someone under the bed impaling you. Used in different forms or standing against a tree, you get impaled. It seems like this death has been used in so many different horror films. But this is the OG. This is the classic. This is probably the highlight of the movie. It's the Kevin Bacon death scene. Again, all props to Tom Savini. Made this memorable as hell. Kevin Bacon wasn't exactly the most amazing actor at this point in time, but you could see he was young, charismatic. Can only see him being maybe a huge star, but like Nightmare, kind of the Johnny Depp thing where it's like you still get that iconic death scene with Kevin Bacon. Marcy's death scene, good build-up, good suspense. I feel like, I didn't expect to actually show the axe in the face afterwards. So I did like that they show that on screen. Brenda's death scene, not much going on there. I think the best thing about the death scenes probably is actually literally just Alice finding the dead bodies hanging up there. I mean, the reveal on the door, the dude hanging with the arrow in the body and in the face, like that is like amazingly over the top fun scene, I would say. The death scenes are good though, but there's a lot of filler scenes here. You don't really care about the characters. Ned's death is sort of off screen, which I feel like the practical Joker probably should get his comeuppance on screen, but we don't get that here. We don't get that in part two. Even Shelley had an off death screen in part three, so these movies have a way of sort of letting the practical Jokers off the hooks to some degree. Okay, so what is this movie most known for? Probably the fact that Jason's not really in this movie, at least not in the Jason form that we would come to know and love. What we have here as a killer is Mrs. Voorhees, Pamela Voorhees. And you'd know that, and because of that, we got this iconic question in Scream. Well, if you're ever being questioned by Ghostface, that's a question that you should get right if you know anything about horror films. Fortunately for Casey Becker, it just didn't go right for her that way. She was a dead woman anyways at that point. They wouldn't kill her no matter what, but she could have got that answer right. Does Mrs. Voorhees as the killer work here, as a whodunit? Well, Betsy Palmer said something herself, which I agree with completely. She said that you're really not giving any breadcrumbs to the audience with the reveal of Mrs. Voorhees as the killer because she's never seen at any point earlier in the movie. Betsy Palmer's idea, which I agree with completely, was that she should have been in the diner at the beginning. When Annie walks in, mentions Crystal Lake, everybody looks at her sideways. You should have showed Pamela Voorhees in the background there. The audience appreciates with a whodunit when they can rewatch them and be like, oh, look, that's her in the background there. Oh, look, she was paying attention. She heard Annie talk about her going to Crystal Lake. That makes sense now. She hops in the Jeep and goes and kills Annie. That all makes sense. It's a very smart thing. Apparently Cunningham heard this from Betsy Palmer and said, the hell with it. Forget it. I'm like, man, a whodunit where there's absolutely zero chance to guess who the killer is, it's kind of a fail, and you can tell that they're thinking of it as a whodunit because they're doing other things. They're making Steve Christy seem like a red herring. Steve Christy disappears for a lot of the movie, so you think maybe he could be the killer. Crazy Ralph is red herring. You're thinking maybe Crazy Ralph is the killer. So you're going to great lengths to have other suspects. You want to be a legitimate whodunit, but then you're revealing a killer who has had no part, no background appearances. There's zero way for an audience member to watch this movie on the first watch and guess who the killer is. And that does kill the whodunit experience. Now, that said, Betsy Palmer, I guess, was known as more of a TV show actress, more of a family TV show, rated G type of actress. Her being the killer, it is a good sort of, you don't really expect it. When you see her first in that sweater she's wearing, you're thinking, this woman's coming to bake Alice some cookies and some brownies. She's not coming to kill her. So it is a good twist-ish, and it is a good performance, and her motivation makes a lot of sense. She feels like the camp counselors were not paying attention to her son, allowing her son to drown, and now she's taking complete revenge on everybody there. That makes sense. By the way, Alice, for a second, who boards up the house, locks herself in the house, sees a Jeep arrive, a car arrive, immediately unboards the house and goes out to get help from the Jeep. That didn't seem to ring true. Why wouldn't you suspect the person coming to the house is the killer? Like, what made Alice think like, oh, someone's here to help? I would have stayed in the house and not let the person in. At least at that point, you're sort of barricaded in. You have a chance to fight off whoever. It seemed, again, not really great survival instincts on Alice's part to go out there and try to get help from Pamela Voorhees, who ends up giving her the final villain speech, the lecture, and we get this classic sort of fight scene where eventually Miss Voorhees gets decapitated. It's a good end sequence fight between our hero and our villain. I don't love Alice, and I do feel like Pamela Voorhees kind of came out of nowhere, so it doesn't feel as earned as other Friday the 13th movies where you had an established, I think, better hero on with more character development, and you had Jason, an established villain throughout. So you actually look forward to that final confrontation. This one's kind of just two random characters meeting for the first time and then sparring it out. Okay, now, all that said, what's great about the movie, the Harry Manfredini score is here present in part one, would be used throughout the series. The point of view shots are always fantastic, making use of the fact that there is an unease when you see somebody watching our characters from the background across the lake. That's done very well. Death scenes, again, fantastic with Tom Savini. One thing I want to talk about that I think is probably outside the Kevin Bacon death scene, the one thing that's a standout that I think for a first watch that really shocks the audience, and I would encourage everybody to watch this with like the most amazing, loud surround sound possible, is the jump scare with Jason at the end. Little kid Jason jumping out of the water and grabbing Alice in the boat. That shit comes out of nowhere. That shit is scary. That is a crazy, amazing jump scare with the shriek of the music. I applaud the hell out of that scene. They said, Sean Cunningham said that when they were doing like the test screenings, when they were trying to sell the movie, that that was probably the scene that got everybody, because they said that executives would have screenings then would invite their friends in the back of the theater and just watch everybody's reaction to that scene. So that scene got everybody. That was a scary scene. That scene is probably one of the best jump scares in the entire franchise, if not the best. So big props to that. Also, the seed planted there for the sequel potential of Jason, which we'll talk about in future franchises. But the presence of Jason at the end, it does invite some theories. And one theory is, was Jason alive during the events of part one? Was Jason actually helping Mrs. Voorhees? Because, Nick Arcana's always told me that, sometimes you see the killer with like a man's boots, and some of the things the killer does in this movie does seem like something that would take a lot of physical strength. You're hanging bodies on doors. You're doing a lot that seems like it would take a lot of strength. And also, there's some horrorportation, as you call it, where the villain seems to be able to travel in and out of different places. If it's just Pamela Voorhees, I mean, she's very fast with the Jeep, doing a lot of different things here. But is Jason helping her? I mean, I've done a video called "Did Jason Drown," which is in the archives. If you want to check that out, it elaborates more here. But it does seem like Jason probably could be helping. The problem is, where's Jason at the end when Mrs. Voorhees needs him? When she has that final fight with Alice, if Jason's there, they should basically be doing a 2-on-1 and making sure they take out Alice. Jason's nowhere to be seen. The other thing is, Mrs. Voorhees, her vengeance, her revenge, her whole motivation in this first movie is based on the idea that Jason's dead. So if Jason's not dead, it kind of kills her motivation here. There is a theory that makes the most sense that I talked about in the video, where maybe she had tried some kind of voodoo to bring Jason back to life, and she thought it was unsuccessful, but it was successful. So Jason did come back to life, appearing as an adult in the woods. And we know that Jason does, and we bring in the sequel canon, we know that Jason does see Alice at some point kill his mother, because he's going to have a revenge motive himself to take out Alice at the beginning of part 2. So Jason in the sequels is here in the first one somewhere. It's just, if you go strictly by the logic of the first movie, it doesn't make much sense that Pamela Voorhees, who's literally like stalking through the woods throughout the entire first movie, that she wouldn't have ran to Jason, or Jason, with his love for his mom, wouldn't have found his mom in that scenario. We have to believe that Jason finally finds his mom after being in the woods at the very end, just in time to see Alice cut off her head. It's assuming a lot. I think there's some legs to the idea that maybe Jason is helping his mom without the mom knowing, or maybe that Jason at the very end is helping, but you have to explain Jason's absence then in the whole Alice sequence at the end, because Jason and the mom together, they're not losing a fight against Alice. So overall, with Friday the 13th, I do like this movie. I do think it's a pretty good slasher film. I do think it fails as a whodunit. I do think it's weak compared to some of the sequels. As we go in the franchise, I'll tell you which sequels I think are better than the first one. I think that it's necessary, if you're watching the franchise, to watch this movie, because it does plant the seeds for Jason. But I think the franchise is Jason, so the lack of Jason doesn't necessarily help this movie on a rewatch, because if you're going back to watch the franchise now, you're expecting Jason, so it's kind of jarring not to have Jason here. But Tom Savini, shouts out to him, and shouts out to Sean Cunningham for getting this movie done, spawning a lot. I mean, Halloween created a slasher craze in the 80s, but Friday the 13th also making $40 million, $39 million on a $600,000 budget, also has to take some credit for then spawning tons of horror sequels. Who knows if Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't come along? Who knows if Nightmare on Elm Street comes along if there isn't a Friday the 13th or a Halloween? So I give much props to this movie. It started a franchise that I love, but I just don't love this movie in particular. Let me know in the comments how you feel about Friday the 13th. I'm going to be going through all the movies one by one, discussing whatever theories we can find, rewatching the movies, hopefully in 4K as they come out in 4K. Until next time, you guys take care.